I think the wrong person went to prison for my uncle's murder, and I just found proof. Throwaway account because my family still doesn't know I've been digging into this. My uncle Richard Holloway was murdered 6 years ago. The case was solved in under a week. His live-in girlfriend, Dana Whitmore, was convicted and sentenced to 25 years to life. Everyone moved on. I didn't. My uncle wasn't a saint, but he wasn't violent. He was a retired high school history teacher who lived alone in a renovated Victorian house on the edge of our small town. The kind of place that creaks even when no one's home. He collected antique clocks, volunteered at the library, and had a habit of writing long, rambling emails instead of texting. Dana moved in about a year before his death. She was younger than him by about 15 years. The town immediately decided she was a gold digger. She had tattoos, rode a motorcycle, and worked nights at a bar 2 towns over. People stared. People whispered. You know how small towns are. The night Richard died was during the annual Founders Festival. Fireworks, music, everyone outside. Perfect cover for noise. According to the police report, Dana and Richard had an argument around 9:30 p.m. Neighbors said they heard raised voices. At 10:12 p.m., someone called 911 after seeing smoke coming from the upstairs bedroom window. Firefighters found Richard dead on the bedroom floor. Cause of death, blunt force trauma to the head. Dana was found outside, barefoot, screaming, covered in soot. She kept saying, "I didn't mean for the fire to start." That sentence alone sealed her fate in the court of public opinion. Here's what never sat right with me. The fire was small, contained. It didn't start until after Richard was already dead. The medical examiner said he'd been killed at least 30 minutes before smoke inhalation could have occurred. Dana's story was that they argued, Richard stormed upstairs, and she left to cool off. She said she'd gone to the festival, walked around for a bit, then came back when she saw the smoke. The prosecution said she snapped, hit him with a clock from his collection, set the fire to cover it up, and panicked. The jury believed them. I was 22 at the time. Broke, no resources. But I never stopped thinking about it. Last month, my mom asked me to help clean out the last of Richard's things from a storage unit we'd kept all these years. Old books, papers, boxes labeled in his neat handwriting. That's when I found the notebook. It was tucked inside a hollowed-out book. No one had ever mentioned it in evidence. No police sticker, no inventory tag. Inside were entries dated the last 6 months of his life, and they were disturbing. Richard wrote about someone watching the house. At first, he thought he was imagining it. Then he started documenting times, descriptions, a car parked too long down the street, footsteps on the side path at night. Then the name started appearing. Caleb. Caleb was Richard's former student from years ago. He'd been obsessed with Richard back in high school, followed him, wrote him letters. It escalated until the school intervened. A restraining order was issued, but it expired years before Richard's death. I remembered the name immediately because my uncle had mentioned him once at Thanksgiving. Said he hoped he'd finally moved on. According to the notebook, Caleb hadn't. Richard wrote that Caleb had contacted him again, said he'd been watching over him, that he knew Dana wasn't good enough, that Richard belonged to him. One entry from 3 weeks before the murder ends with, "If something happens to me, look at Caleb R." That sentence alone made my stomach drop. I pulled the old trial transcripts. Caleb's name was mentioned exactly once, by Dana, during her interrogation. She told police she'd seen a man outside the house weeks earlier. She described him as thin, dark-haired, nervous. Said Richard looked terrified when he noticed him. Police dismissed it as her trying to deflect blame. They never followed up. I kept digging. Caleb R. was living less than 2 miles away at the time of the murder. He didn't attend the Founders Festival. He called in sick to work that night. And get this, a neighbor had reported seeing a man leaving the Holloway house around 9:45 p.m., but the statement was dismissed because the witness couldn't positively identify Dana, because it wasn't Dana. The final piece came last week. I tracked down one of Richard's clocks, the one the prosecution claimed Dana used as the murder weapon. It had been returned to the family after the trial, still cracked, still stained. I took it to a private lab. No Dana. But there was touch DNA on the inner brass rim, male, and it matched Caleb R., who had been arrested 3 years ago for stalking another former teacher. I don't know what to do now. Dana has been in prison for 6 years for a murder I am almost certain she didn't commit. My family still believes she's guilty. The town definitely does. But my uncle knew. He wrote it down, and someone ignored it. If you're reading this and thinking the system always gets it right, it doesn't. And if anything happens to me after posting this, please remember the name Caleb R. Update, I turned over the evidence. And things escalated faster than I ever expected. I didn't plan on updating this so soon, but a lot has happened, and honestly, I'm a little shaken. First, thank you to everyone who commented, messaged me, and pushed me to stop investigating quietly and actually involve professionals. You were right. I was in over my head. 3 days after I posted, I contacted the Innocence Project in my state. I sent them scans of my uncle's notebook, photos of the clock, the lab results, and screenshots of old police reports I'd managed to dig up. I didn't expect a response for weeks. They called me the next morning. The woman I spoke to went completely silent when I read her the notebook entry that said, "If something happens to me, look at Caleb R." She asked me twice if I was sure the notebook had never been logged into evidence. It hadn't. By the end of the call, they told me they were opening a preliminary review into Dana's conviction. I cried in my car afterward, like full-on shaking, ugly crying. Here's something I didn't expect at all. Dana contacted me. I guess word spreads fast when lawyers start making phone calls. She sent me a handwritten letter through her attorney. It was careful, restrained, and way calmer than I think I'd be in her position. She said she'd always believed someone else had been in the house that night. She also said something that hit me hard. I told them Richard was scared before he died. I kept saying it, but no one wanted to hear a woman like me. She never knew about Caleb's name. Richard had apparently protected her from the worst of it. 2 days after the Innocence Project confirmed they were reviewing the case, I got a knock on my door. 2 detectives. Not friendly. They asked how I'd gotten the notebook, why I hadn't come forward sooner, why I'd taken the clock to a private lab instead of turning it in. The tone wasn't, "Thank you for helping solve a murder." It was, "Why are you causing problems?" One of them actually said, "You do realize you're reopening wounds for a lot of people." I told him the wrong person being in prison was a pretty big wound. They left without taking anything, but the message was clear. I wasn't welcome in their narrative. This is the part that scared me enough to start locking my doors. I was leaving work last night when I noticed a man leaning against my car. Thin, dark hair, nervous energy. He smiled like he already knew me. He said my name. I never told him who I was. He said, "Your uncle talked about you, said you were smart." I asked how he knew where I worked. He tilted his head and said, "You've been asking questions. That makes you easy to find." I got in my car and drove straight to the police station. By the time I came back out with an officer, he was gone. The Innocence Project has officially requested access to the physical evidence from the original trial, including items that were destroyed after conviction. Apparently, not everything was actually destroyed. They're also filing to retest biological evidence using modern methods that weren't available 6 years ago. Dana's attorney believes there's enough here to push for a new evidentiary hearing. As for me, I've backed everything up. Digital copies, physical copies. Multiple people now have them. If something happens to me, this doesn't disappear. I used to think murder mysteries were neat little puzzles with clean endings. They're not. They're messy, political, and terrifying, especially when the truth threatens people who thought the case was buried. I'll update again if and when I can. For now, I'm watching my back. Final update, the truth came out, and Dana is free. I've been sitting on this for a week because I needed to be absolutely sure before posting. Things have finally slowed down enough that I can breathe, and I think it's time to close this chapter. The mystery is no longer a mystery. The Innocence Project moved faster than I ever thought possible. Once they subpoenaed the original evidence, several things immediately stood out. The clock was never properly swabbed in 2019. The tech testified back then that touch DNA was unreliable and unnecessary. Richard's bedroom window latch showed external tampering, something the fire report dismissed as heat warping. The 911 call timestamp didn't match the official timeline. The fire started after the estimated time of death by nearly 40 minutes. Then came the biggest mistake law enforcement made. They had Caleb R.'s fingerprints on file from a previous arrest and never ran them against anything in the Holloway house. Not the window, not the clock, not the hallway banister. All three matched him. Caleb was picked up for questioning after I reported my encounter with him outside my workplace. This time, the police couldn't ignore him. not with lawyers watching every move. At first, he denied everything. Then they showed him the notebook, my uncle's handwriting, his name. That line, if something happens to me, look at Caleb R. According to one of the detectives, who was suddenly much nicer to me, Caleb went completely still, asked for water, then asked if Dana was still in prison. When they said yes, he laughed, not nervously, not accidentally. He laughed because he thought he'd won, Caleb confessed 2 days later. Here's what actually happened that night. Caleb had been watching the house for months. He knew the festival schedule. He knew Dana worked late and left often when tensions were high. He knew Richard kept his bedroom window cracked because the house overheated. The argument between Dana and Richard gave him the opening he'd been waiting for. He entered through the side garden, climbed the trellis, and slipped in through the upstairs window while Richard was alone. Richard recognized him instantly. According to Caleb, Richard told him to leave, threatened to call the police. Caleb panicked, grabbed the nearest heavy object, one of the antique clocks Richard prized. One blow. Caleb said Richard didn't even have time to scream. The fire? Caleb admitted he knocked over a candle on purpose. He wanted it to look like chaos, like rage, like something messy. Then he waited. When Dana returned screaming, covered in soot, Caleb was already gone, blending into a town too distracted by fireworks to notice one more shadow moving through the dark. Dana walked out of prison. I was there. I stood outside the gates when Dana was released after 6 years, 4 months, and 11 days. She looked older, harder, but when she saw the sky without fences in the way, she just stopped and cried. She hugged me, tight, and whispered. He finally told someone. Richard did tell someone, just not soon enough. Dana's conviction was vacated immediately. The DA issued a public apology, which felt hollow but still. She's pursuing a civil lawsuit, and honestly, I hope she takes them for everything. Caleb was charged with first-degree murder, arson, stalking, breaking, and entering. This time, there was no rush to judgment, no ignored evidence, no convenient scapegoat. He pleaded guilty. Life without parole. About me, I'm okay, shaken, angry, relieved, exhausted. The police never apologized to me personally, but one detective did say, "You were right to keep pushing." I'll take it. My uncle didn't get justice the way he deserved. Not at first, but in the end, the truth didn't stay buried. If there's one thing I've learned through all this, it's this. Sometimes the story everyone believes is just the one that's easiest to tell.